really glad everybody could join us today. People are still trickling in here. So we, as Morgan said, we'd like to wait a few minutes just to make sure that we're leaving everybody ample time, because you guys do have other responsibilities, kids, lunch, bills, UPS people leaving packages on your front door from Amazon, all those kinds of fun things. But we're here today to talk about anxiety. It's something that not a lot of people discuss so much in the ADHD community, as much as, of course, attention and focus. But for a good number of kids and their families, it is something that is a challenge, and it's something that they face. So Morgan, who's runs our marketing department, had a great idea to say, hey, let's talk about anxiety. Let's talk about something not a lot of people are talking about, because it's a conversation that's worth having. So I do anticipate we get a pretty good crowd today, but it's not something that's at front of mind for a majority of ADHD parents. And a lot of you have probably felt that before, where it's easier to have a conversation with other folks, whether it's your Facebook group that you're a part of, or moms and dads at school, other parents, where you can kind of talk about, hey, what have you done for focus? What have you done for attention? What have you done for, homework and task management? And there's a lot of good conversation that goes around that. But when it comes to anxiety, a lot of people stop in their tracks because they either don't have the familiarity or the experience, or they just haven't experienced it themselves at all. So they may not know what you're talking about. But as we'll see in a few minutes, it's something that's called a comorbid condition, which we'll unpack a little bit. So without further ado, I'll jump into our presentation for today. And in a moment, I will share our screen so you can see our presentation. But I will introduce myself again. My name is Rich Brancaccio. I'm a former school psychologist, and I'm also the founder and CEO here at Revibe Technologies. We like to do these webinars, and as you may have noticed, we've been having a few guests that have come to do some presentations for us. So you're not only having to see me all the time, we've had a few guest presenters, which has been fun for us. And we're going to get a few more coming in soon. Some world-renowned experts in the field of psychology will be joining us in the coming weeks. But we like to do these webinars because as a parent of a child with some kind of a focusing issue, a lot of times that's ADHD, maybe they're on the autism spectrum, or maybe they're just, a child who struggles to focus and there's no diagnosis. It's hard to find places to turn, and it's hard to find time as a mom or a dad or a grandparent or a caretaker to do all the research that you need to do to even just know where to start, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Unfortunately, this first step is typically the hardest to make. So we made it a little bit easier. We've got you here with us today, and this may be your first step in terms of starting to learn more about anxiety. This is certainly not the last step, right? We'll show you in a moment. We're not medical doctors. We're not physicians. We're not your GP. We're not here to give you medical advice, but we are here just to shed some light on some things so that you'll know what kinds of questions you should be asking, your health professionals who help you take care of your children. So let's jump into some things. Let me get my screen going, and we'll take a look. We've got a good number of people here, and I think it's time to get started. All right, we're going to go full screen here, and we'll get going. All right, hopefully everybody can see my screen. So again, my name is Rich Brancaccio, the founder and CEO of Revibe, and a former school psychologist. One of my passions was helping kids with ADHD, because as an adult who believes that they have ADHD, I've always seen the challenge, and I've lived through the struggle that a lot of these kids are facing. It's a really tough road to be on if you're just any boy or girl in school, in elementary school, middle school, high school right now. But it's even more challenging when you're facing something like ADHD. The fact that the expectations every year go up in school, we want our kids to read earlier, better, sooner. We want them doing long division, sooner, faster, better. Seemingly every year doesn't help with anything either. Also the fact that the distractions seem to increase every year. More video games, new apps, more technology, which can sometimes be a blessing and can sometimes be a curse. So let's take a look at our next slide here. So I mentioned it before, we're not your child's doctor. We're not offering medical advice. We don't want you to construe this as something that you should go and just do, or that there's any cures necessarily of what we're talking about. But this is to really just drive your thought process. It gets you to understand all the interventions that are available, all the different options that you have. So take what you learned today and go back and speak to your physician, speak to your personal family psychologist, your psychiatrist, etc. With that said, 60% of people with ADHD experience what are called comorbid conditions. Now, that's a fancy way of saying when you have one thing, there are common other things that hover along with it, that typically join. Where there's smoke, there's fire, and where there is ADHD, 60% of people have something else that typically trails along with it that'll also give them some kind of a challenge. In terms of the percentages, 30% of kids with ADHD diagnoses also have an anxiety disorder. 50% of adults with ADHD also have an anxiety disorder. So it's not a wild statement to make that many people who experience ADHD symptomology also experience some level of anxiety through an anxiety disorder. We wanted to show you that there's a couple different things, though, in terms of who you should be talking to and what the etiology of the challenges may be, right? There's a couple different ways that you can feel anxious and a couple different pathways anxiety can come up and affect your child. So there are differences. These graphs here, I like to call it a neurotypical brain, an ADHD brain, a brain of someone suffering from depression, anxiety, migraines, etc. But you can see that there are literally differences in brain activity when you get into different neurological disorders. And what I like about this slide is, you'll get a lot of different people. You'll get folks who are disbelievers in ADHD. Maybe that's a family member, maybe it's someone from the school system, although it's pretty rare in the school system because they see enough children. Maybe it's a neighbor, somebody who, gives you that leering look of, I don't really think that, that's a problem for you or for your child. That's just something that they can choose to do. They can choose to be more focused, or they can choose to not be depressed, or they can choose to not be anxious. That's not the case. Science tells us otherwise. There are literally differences in the brain, in the wiring of the brain, if you will, and the chemistry of the brain. The way that the brain works is different for different people. So if you think of 100 people that it's not a surprise when you think how different that everybody really is, because they have different brain chemistries going on in many cases. So what are the three main symptoms of ADHD? The reason we're telling you this is because the question that you may have is my child experiencing ADHD? Are they experiencing anxiety? Are they experiencing both? And is it a true anxiety disorder that's causing a challenge for my child? Or are they feeling anxious because of their ADHD? So let's unpack that a little bit. So three main symptoms of ADHD are inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. And of course, there's different incarnations of this. We have various subtypes. There's ADHD, primarily an attentive type. There's primarily hyperactive type. There's combined type. So it shows itself in different ways, or manifests in different ways. But those are the three main drivers for an ADHD diagnosis. Now, what that looks like when it plays out with your child: inattention. So you could make careless mistakes. You could have trouble paying attention in the classroom. Typically, my experience has been people with ADHD can actually focus extremely well on things that they're very, very interested in. We call it hyperfocus. They can focus better than the neurotypical classmate who sits next to them on things that they're really excited about. But they really struggle when that hill starts to go upwards and they have to really pedal the bicycle hard. That's where if you think of it as a bicyclist, I began running again. I'm almost 40 years old, so I've tried to get back in shape a little bit right now. And I've noticed when I run downhills, I feel fantastic. I feel like, I'm Carl Lewis on foot, or I'm Lance Armstrong on a bicycle. I feel great. But when the hill starts to go up and the going gets tough, my strength is really challenged. My endurance, I can run forever if it's a flat surface or downhill, no problem. And I think of attention the same way. When you think about a child with ADHD, it's very much an easier downhill run, if you will, when they're doing something that's easier to understand for them or exciting, that gets them pumped about what they're doing. But once you start to present things that are really hard, super challenging, or boring, it's like the road is going upwards, and they have the endurance to last a really long time to focus, but they may not have the strength and focus to run up that hill. So that's where you start to see the challenge come about. So you'll see kids who will appear to not listen. They'll lack some follow through in terms of execution on tasks that are harder. They'll avoid things that take a long time. That's why we say break down work. We have different webinars that we've done. Please check them out if they're helpful, that focus on things you can do, little interventions and little tricks you can do, that parenting tricks or life hacks, as people call them now, to help your child perform better, to make things easier for them. So we won't get into that today, but they'll have trouble with long-term, sit for an hour and focus continuously. They're more easily distracted once they're on task, and then they can be forgetful for things. Impulsivity and hyperactivity. So fidgeting is something that we talk a lot about at Revibe. It's something that we actually classify, we quantify fidgeting from our hardware device, our wearable device, because it's an important feature about focus, and you can use that to your benefit, actually. So kids may be more hyperactive, more fidgety, more wiggles going on. They may leave their seat, so you'll see more movements. So like if you're a Revibe user, you may see 2,000 steps during math class if you look at your results, and you'll go, why is this child walking around during math? They should be sitting and listening. That's what happens sometimes when it's harder to sit in your seat and stay focused for a long time. They can feel restless. They'll run, they'll climb, they'll be a little bit noisier when they're playing. They may be less cognizant of the noise that they're creating if they're tapping a pen on the desk or they're humming. Again, because it's just impulsive types of behavior. It's not intentional. It's just impulsive. It's behavior. It's action without thought. Is how I think of impulsivity. You're just acting without thinking about it. They will sometimes talk excessively, blurt out answers, difficulty waiting for turns, and they'll interrupt or intrude upon other people's conversations. So most of that, if you're a parent of a child with ADHD, you probably already knew. But here's something that you may not know, some anxiety symptoms. I suspect a lot of you are here today because you're curious, about your child's difficulty with anxiety, and you wanted to learn more. And that's great. Like I said, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So you're starting to learn what you need to learn more about today. So interestingly, you will get trouble concentrating if you have anxiety. If the root of the challenge, if the root cause of the challenge is ADHD, of course, there could be trouble concentrating. But if you have somebody without ADHD who just has anxiety, they can also have trouble concentrating. We also see that with depression. You will sometimes get insomnia or waking up with bad dreams when you look at children who are affected by anxiety. Not eating properly, quick to become irritable or angry, out of control during behavioral outbursts. They can be tense and fidgety. If you look at someone who's tapping their pencil intently like this, who's nervous, someone who's sitting, in court, or they're in trouble with the school principal or something like that. So there's a lot of overlap. If you think of this like a Venn diagram, think back to high school, there's a lot of gray area that's in the middle of these two disorders, essentially, that look a lot alike. So how do you know what it is, and how do you tease them apart? You can get things in people who are tapping their pencil. You can almost look at their face in some cases, and this isn't to say we can simplify this to just looking at someone's face, but just to give you an example to understand. If you look at a child who's inattentive and they're tapping their pencil, they're probably doing something like this, kind of looking around, thinking about something else, and the pencil's kind of an afterthought that they're just tapping, just kind of something to fill the quietness or the silence in their brain or their body with a little bit of activity to fill it in. It's like when you like to have white noise in the background. So they're making their own white noise. But again, it's kind of just happening in the background. You look at somebody who's anxious, somebody who's nervous, somebody who's in a courtroom, waiting to be tried on trial, or somebody, who's in a hospital waiting room, they're waiting to get a thumbs up that their loved one is okay after a procedure or something like that. If they're tapping their pencil, they're going to be looking more at the pencil. This is something where they're focusing everything into it, and they're very driven by it. So just it's a way to illustrate that it's the same behavior, but it's coming from two different aspects. So think of it like that. You'll get kids who will want to use the bathroom often. So what I call avoidance types of behaviors, which can also be seen with ADHD. Sometimes children will cry often who are very anxious. My interpretation of that is because children, particularly young children, don't have a great conduit to be able to take this anxiety that lives within them and to get it out, to expel that anxiety and to blow off that steam, if you will. So they'll internalize it and they'll cry, and that's how they'll show they're upset. You'll get clinginess, you'll get complaints of stomach aches or feeling unwell. So these are some of the things that you can see in childhood anxiety. Now, in terms of similarities in these symptoms, when you look at things like ADHD for inattention, we go over to the anxiety side. Again, you can have trouble concentrating, and you could have constant worry or negative thoughts. Impulsivity and hyperactivity for ADHD could look like in kids with anxiety. It could be quick to become, again, irritable, blurt out answers, fidgeting, using the bathroom often. The thing that I want you to keep in mind when you're trying to understand, is it a chicken or egg, which we'll talk about next, is sometimes it's clear, and working with a physician, a psychologist, psychiatrist, you can sometimes figure that out. Sometimes you can't figure it out because you just can't, you cannot build enough evidence to say, I feel confident to say it's this or it's that. And sometimes it's truly a mixture of both things. So the next slide shows you, anxiety, is it the cause or is it the effect? So some things to think about. An anxiety disorder on the left, and ADHD and resulting anxiety. So you can have an anxiety disorder, you can have ADHD, you can have both. You can have a primary diagnosis and a secondary diagnosis. But what's interesting that some people don't realize is this: when you're talking to your doctors and your physicians, it's good to have a conversation about, could this be potentially anxiety that is a result of ADHD? Meaning, maybe it's not a true anxiety disorder. Maybe it's anxious feelings that are coming secondary to the symptomology of ADHD. What I mean by that is, look at an anxiety disorder. A lot of times, you'll see difficulty regulating stress and anxiety, and it's usually evident, in my experience, from an earlier age. It's ADHD, particularly the inattentive part. I sometimes didn't see or hear, even doing, like an early developmental profile. You don't always see symptomology. Sometimes with very hyperactive behaviors you will, but when it comes to more inattentive types, it's not extremely obvious when kids are young, 2, 3, 4 years old. When they get into school, things become more obvious, more apparent. Anxiety, in my experience, is typically shown a little bit earlier. There's also a family history of anxiety disorders in many cases. So in a lot of cases, you won't be surprised because maybe you yourself or your spouse or your parents, cousins, grandparents, someone also maybe had anxiety down the line. You'll get things with anxiety that's truly an anxiety disorder, that kids may avoid social situations because they're overwhelmed with people or experiences. The act of having to speak, or speak to somebody who's a quote, new person. I want you to meet a friend of mine, and your child's just, quivering behind you because they're so nervous about meeting a new person, even though you're saying, this is not a stranger, this is somebody who I know, and it's a safe person to talk to. You can say hello. So you'll see the difference there, where you typically wouldn't see that with just ADHD. Symptoms of anxiety tend to improve after using interventions for anxiety. So specifically when you do things that are targeted to treat anxiety, that will typically improve somewhat. Some things are faster than others. But when it comes to ADHD and anxiety, it's it's a bit different. The level of anxiety that you'll get, in my experience with ADHD, is less. Meaning, if your child is nervous, let's say because they feel overwhelmed, a feeling that we get a lot of times with children who have ADHD is they feel overwhelmed because their executive functioning challenges make it hard for them to keep up pace in the classroom. It makes it harder for them to remember to do their homework, study for their tests, get their report done on time, create the diorama that's due on Monday. And because of this, they can start to feel like they're getting behind, or they're digging themselves into a hole that's harder and harder to get out of as the school year goes on. So that, of course, can cause anxiety if you feel like you're constantly late or behind pace in terms of keeping up with your classmates, or you're having a hard time organizing things and things keep compounding. So that will make you feel, would make anybody feel anxious or nervous. So that's something that you would see typically with ADHD. What you can sometimes notice is as you start to improve the symptoms of ADHD, the anxiety should generally alleviate. You should have less anxiety as those things that are causing it, from ADHD symptoms go away. Whereas if there's a true anxiety disorder that's underlying, they may still persist even after the ADHD challenges have been improved. So that's something that, again, to talk to your pediatrician about, your psychologist, your psychiatrist. But this is just to help you guys at home kind of understand how those people may be thinking and what terms that they may be using when they start to try to tease apart ADHD and anxiety and how they can coexist. So as I mentioned, just to recap, you could have ADHD. You could have a true anxiety disorder that looks like ADHD because the child is not able to focus as well as they should or they have in the past. So that could look, so anxiety can look like ADHD. Conversely, ADHD can look like anxiety because, again, symptoms of ADHD can cause you to feel anxious. Or there could be truly a dual diagnosis where both things are truly there. So it's important to understand kind of how these things interplay together. So as a parent, what can you do? That's probably what you're wondering right now. Thank you for sharing that. But now what do I do? So I'm a big advocate of talking to your support network, meaning your pediatrician, your psychologist, your psychiatrist. Talk to your school. There's a lot of things that your school personnel can do from a behavioral intervention support vantage point that they can put in place to both reduce anxiety and also to mitigate it, if it's already taken place. Meaning, we can put certain things in place that will prevent triggers from happening that will make the child, feel anxious. Can also put things in place so if they do become anxious, we can help them feel better faster. There's a lot of little tricks of the trade that we do in school. So always talk to your school, try to get them involved, try to be as open as a parent as you are comfortable doing, to just tell them what's going on, tell them what you've experienced at home that sets, anxiety in motion for your child. Tell them, what you've done that hasn't worked or that hasn't been helpful. Tell them what you've done that's been helpful. A lot of people in my experience, and I no longer work in a school system, but I did spend 10 years working in a couple of school systems, over 10 years. And since I've been out of the school system and just running Revibe, I get to talk to a good number of parents. And I hear, being on the other side of the fence, that there are a lot of people who, have a mistrust for the school system, where they think that everyone is out to get them. And for sure, there are a couple of bad eggs in a couple of school systems across the country. It's going to happen no matter where you are, no matter what industry you're talking about. But I've worked in, I was counting the other day, I think I've worked in 8 or 9 different school buildings over my career, between having a couple schools at the same time in a couple districts. And I can tell you that most people in education are in it for the outcome, not for the income. Meaning they're in it because they care about children. They want to see your little one do well. So just be as open and honest with them as you can. And I've seen really good things happen when you do that. So in terms of helping kids, an accurate diagnosis can help with some effective treatment, right? If you believe that just telling your child to, don't worry about if you're late, we have your IEP set up so that, you get extended time on your test or to turn in work. And you say, well, she or he should feel better. We've fixed the things that make you anxious. You say that that's what makes you anxious. Why are you still anxious? Well, again, there could be an underlying anxiety disorder where there might not be a great reason for anxiety. It may just be persistent, low level, constant level of anxiety is something that's really challenging. What's interesting for you as parents is what I want to talk about on the next slide. So I hit this already, collaborate with school personnel to treat the whole child. But what I think is really important to talk about is this part here is communicating with your child. In my experience, this has been the best tool that you can do is to communicate with your child. Children feel, which some of you will say, yes, I agree with that. Some of you will say, no, we have an amazing bond right now. We talk all the time. But it was always surprising to me when I, as an outsider to children's lives, would come in as a school psychologist and I would talk to them and I would just tell them as much information as was appropriate. So I would explain what was going on, why they were feeling the way they were feeling, to normalize their feelings. This is not weird. You are not bad. You are not doing anything wrong. And to just say, I accept your feelings completely, and I'm not going to make you feel guilty about it. Now, most parents don't make their kids feel guilty about it, certainly not intentionally, but a lot of times it happens not because of what we say, but because of how we say it. And some of the questions that we ask. And this is coming from me transcribing what I heard other children tell me when I was a school professional. And I'm relaying it back to you as parents because it was really interesting. Most kids wouldn't say, my mom or dad told me that, I'm bad and that, my anxiety is something I should be embarrassed or ashamed about. They would say things to me like, my mom or dad keep asking me, why does this bother me? Or they don't believe, they say they believe me, but the tone of their voice says that they feel like I'm making this up. So sometimes it's not what you say, it's what you don't say, or it's what you say in the way that you say it. So what I'm trying to get at is the point of talking to your children to let them know a couple different things. You can teach them a couple different strategies, but the most important thing that you can do is to make sure that you are speaking to these children in a voice that conveys support, right? And we'll talk more about that in a couple slides. But just communicate with your children is the most important thing. Talk to them. So this next slide, teach thought stopping. So again, sometimes children will get into a negative reciprocal cycle, right? They'll get into something where they can't stop thinking about something. And there's something that's called, rational emotive therapy that I used to be a big fan of and still am. And there are, in some cases, you can challenge kids' thoughts. And by challenge, I don't mean to put them down or to make them feel silly or ashamed, but to supportively kind of, embrace your child and say, well, I hear what you're saying or why you're nervous, but let's talk about why that is. And let me challenge your fear with some facts. So you can quell a lot of nervousness and anxiety by bringing to bear scientific proof. So let's talk about COVID-19 for a minute. This could be something that's causing a lot of anxiety for some kids. They see the news, they hear, you and your family members talking about not wanting to catch COVID. And I've heard from a couple different parents that this is something where their children immediately start to get very nervous about contracting COVID, or what if my family or my mom or my dad contract COVID. And on one hand, if they're only focusing on what they hear, this is something that's dangerous. It could be life-threatening for some people, and it spreads very easily. Wow, those three things in and of themselves, that should cause you to be concerned, very much so. But what they're not thinking about is they're not including the other facts that can come in to balance out this fear or this anxiety to neutralize it. And this is something that psychologists are great at. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And it's part of what I mentioned earlier, kind of gets baked into that, where you're challenging these thoughts and these fears with facts. So you would say something like, I know that it's scary, and that you said that, it's easily spread. It can cause people to be hospitalized or to lose their life, and that it's very rampant right now in the country. But let's think about this. If we're home and you're spending 99% of your time here at home, what are your chances of getting that? Or what are your chances of our family contracting that, since we've all been here for so long? When we do go to the grocery store, we wear a mask, and the other people are usually wearing a mask, and that can substantially reduce our risk. So you can kind of combat their fears with facts. And for a lot of kids, that's helpful. And you would assume as a grown-up, of course they would do that. But kids' brains aren't quite as developed as our brains are, so they don't go through all the same processes that we do. So keep that in mind when you're working with kids. Have a routine. So let's talk about kids for a minute who are generally anxious. Kids who are just generally anxious seem to do better when they know what's coming next. They feel prepared. They feel that they're in control. And there's two different things I've always talked about as a psychologist. There's the need to make life smoothed out. You want to smooth out those waves for your child so that they're not, running into the ocean and getting knocked over every 2 seconds. And you have to do that, right? Because kids can only take so much. They're very resilient. But like anybody, if you're just constantly getting knocked down, it's hard to get back up after a while. So you want to smooth things over so that their pathway forward is smoother. However, you understand as a parent that you're not going to be there at every moment for your child. You can't be present for every moment that they're going to have a difficult situation. So it's also important to build in some skill building into this, right? So you want to stick to a routine, but I would say to you, I would say for you to challenge your child once in a while in a safe setting like at home, and mix it up a little bit, right? If you want a smoother routine, if your child's fundamentally impacted by anxiety, then I would start by saying, hey, let's smooth the asphalt here. For setting concrete, let's get the smoothing thing out. Let's make it nice and smooth for now, because we have to start somewhere. Because we're on a rocky, bumpy sidewalk right now when you first get into this. So let's smooth it out. But it's good to build in some controlled exercises every once in a while where you can kind of shake things up a little bit. So you can be there to support them and say, hey, I know things are different. We didn't plan on this, but let's work through it together. What can we do? It's not the end of the world. Here's why. Let's fight your fears with some facts. So it's a combination of getting them in a good position to start to get on the uphill improvement, to get on the escalator of getting better. But don't make things completely perfect, because that's not how the real world is either, right? So deep breathing. So if your child's really anxious, let's say there's something they have a hard time with. When I was a child, I remember vividly in 4th grade, I was a child with ADHD. I was a child with a very bad stuttering problem, and I was a child who had a learning disability in math. Now the stuttering part I've improved. The ADHD worked on substantially, and I've got some tools that I use to help me. The math, of course, is always still a challenge for me, doing mental math. So I love calculators. I've written algorithms myself. I've written our software for our first device. So I can do math, and so can your child, but they just need the right tools to be successful. But I remember sitting in 4th grade, and we would go around the room, and we would do our times tables, or we would do reading out loud. And for me, I would count how many kids until I have to read what paragraph, and I would sweating and get very nervous because I had to read out loud, or I had to do a math problem I couldn't do. So I wish I knew about deep breathing exercises. You can tell your child, if you know you're going to get nervous or anxious when X, Y, or Z happens, before it happens, bring yourself down and lower your stress, lower your anxiety beforehand. So when you get nervous, it's going to come back up. That's okay, but you won't be at a boiling point when it happens. So deep breathing basically is the art of taking 3 to 5 big deep breaths in, holding it for a few seconds, and getting all that breath back out. doing this 3 to 5 times. I still do this. If I'm doing a big presentation, I was in San Francisco about a year and a half ago at a big med tech convention. I was talking about clinical trials and things like that. And I was a little bit nervous. It was a big deal. And I just did my deep breathing exercises before I went up there, before I went in the room to present to all these people. So it's something I suggest you talk to your children about, learn more about, talk to your physicians and your medical professionals about. The best way to help, though, I want to come back to this because this is so important. Be kind, be patient, be supportive, show them that you care no matter what. I can't emphasize how many children that I've had where I've helped to kind of facilitate a conversation when I was a school psychologist, to get a parent in the room with their child and to get them on the same page. Picture like some gears that weren't meshing, and you get a challenge like this where they're not, the parent's saying, I love you, I'm here for you, and the child saying, I need help, I feel nervous, but it wouldn't mesh. And to get the conversation going where the child finally understood your parent, no matter what, is going to trust you when you say that you're nervous or you're scared or you're anxious. They're going to support you in terms of being there for you and listening to you and being there to have a shoulder to lean on and to lift you back up when you feel down. And also, they're not going to make you feel guilty about talking about these things. It's really hard for a lot of kids to talk about what makes them nervous. Sometimes they don't know. So at the end of the day, what I want you to walk away from this webinar understanding is, especially with younger children, the behaviors that you'll get related to anxiety are oftentimes the only way that they can communicate that they're anxious. So when you get kids who are throwing a temper tantrum or blurting out or shutting down inwards, or you say, what's the matter? And they go, I don't know. Talk to me. I don't want to talk about it. It's frustrating for you, the parent, because you're trying to help. But a lot of times, you can just tell someone, you can tell your boss. Your boss says, hey, what's the matter? You seem a little off today. You can just say, yeah, I've got a family member, in the hospital, and it's been hard for me to focus. I'm pretty concerned. It's been a rough go for the last couple of days. Your child typically won't have that ability to articulate their feelings like that. So you'll get these behaviors that come out that look like things where you would say, this isn't anxiety, they're just being defiant, or they're just being rude, or they're just breaking the rules. But that's their way of communicating their anxious feelings and thoughts, is through behavior sometimes. So don't let that impact your ability to put that aside, come in with open arms and just embrace your child and say, I don't care what's going on, I'm gonna be there for you. I've got your back, we'll get through this together, I'm here. With that, we'd love to turn it over for a couple of questions if you guys have questions. We have a little bit of time left, about 15, 20 minutes left to talk through any questions that you guys may have. So Morgan, can you let me know if there's any thoughts or comments that people would like to talk about?
We did have some people just asking if the webinar recording would be provided afterwards. Yeah, we'll send that out to you guys, excuse me, tomorrow. And let's see here. Oh, we mentioned yelling kids, but there's also barking dogs here as well. But check in on Facebook as well for any questions, and here on the Zoom meeting, feel free to type in questions to the chat or to the Q&A box.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any questions, and I am not seeing the chat box, but if you guys do have any questions, we'll wait just a couple of moments here. One question. Yeah, so we're
here on the Zoom. Sorry. Feel free to.
What was that, Morgan? Was there a question coming in? Well, somebody was asking a question, but I don't hear them at the moment. But if you do have any questions, feel free to shoot us a note, support@revibe.com, or you can hit the chat box real quick. But thank you guys for coming out. We hope that this was helpful for you to understand more about the intersections of anxiety and ADHD, how they can impact each other. And as I said, just remember, you really can be a tremendously helpful force in getting your child's anxiety reduced and just allowing them to be open enough to start to get that help that they need. Just, again, be open, be supportive, and just tell them beyond everything else, I love you to pieces. I'm here for you. And no matter what, I'll be here to support you.
Rich?
Yeah.
We did have a couple questions coming in.
Sure.
Sorry about earlier. The Facebook Live video was playing back. Okay, so Kara wanted to know about her child's increase in anxiety since coronavirus. With that, he's lately been showing signs of low self-esteem and saying things like, I'm so stupid, but he's reading and doing math on grade level. Any advice for that?
Sure, yeah, I've got two thoughts on that. One, with an increase in anxiety over coronavirus, I'm not surprised that we do hear about more and more folks saying, that their children seem a little bit different at home. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of that could be because they don't understand enough about themselves yet to be able to articulate that and to ask for help. So, lower self-esteem can come from questioning yourself, just throwing an example out there. I'm not suggesting that this is your child, but if your child, is having what I would regard as like a cognitive dissonance, they're saying, I feel this way, but I know I shouldn't feel this way. Why do I feel so nervous? This is so silly. You can start to have some self-esteem where, they start to wonder, why do I think this? What am I silly? Am I crazy? Why do I feel like this? So again, you can combat that by just helping them to talk through their thoughts and their feelings and really normalizing it. It's surprising to me how many kids question whether or not, they're normal. Kids are always wondering about, is this normal compared to other third or fourth graders? And it's something you wouldn't expect kids to always stack themselves up against their peers when they're in, the early grade levels like that, but they certainly do. So normalizing their feelings, I think, is important. Something else that you mentioned, he's on grade level, and he's saying that he feels like he's stupid. What I can imagine happening over the past 3 or 4 months is there's a lot of opportunity for praise, for rewards. We can give kids validation in school, meaning you took your test, you got an 85 or a 90 on it, good job, you are doing it, man, you're rocking it, you're smart, good job, keep up the good work. That's what a lot of kids hear from their teachers when they're doing well. And even when they're struggling, they're still getting some validation of, hey, you're making improvements and you're making progress, you're still behind, but keep up the good work, you're getting there. With the loss of structure, I don't know anybody who I've spoken to, even buddies of mine who are amazing school psychologists, amazing clinical psychologists who I've spoken to. Almost all of them, if not every one of them, has said to me, we haven't done a great job in homeschool. We've tried, but it's really hard. Trying to have structure and trying to make it like it's school, it's not gone that well. So with that, a lot of the support mechanisms that kids got, the validation that they're used to getting, the pat on the back, the sticker chart, the things they typically get, they're not able to get anymore because that's just not how our homes are set up. We don't have that system set up in a typical American household. So that could be another reason that your son's questioning himself in terms of his skills and abilities. However, I will add that, it's not uncommon when I worked with kids with ADHD, when I was a school psychologist, a lot of kids with ADHD do have a lot of self-doubt. Their self-esteem and their self-confidence is typically lower. I used to have kids all the time tell me, I'm stupid, I can't do it. And the reason is when they're in school, depending what literature that you're looking at, 5 to 10% of kids in America, have an ADHD diagnosis, if you will. In my experience, it's something like 2 to 4 kids in every classroom in America struggle to stay on task, which is a lot. It's a big number. But when you're that 1 or 2 or 3 kids in the classroom and the other 27 kids in the classroom have no problem at all focusing and they're just zipping through things, it makes you question yourself. Why can they do this, but I can't? Why is it so easy for them to answer the questions, but I never know what the question even was? So you get this kind of downward spiral where they see other kids, they see themselves, and because of that, they see that they're struggling more, and they assume that they're not as smart as the other kids, which is not true. They're actually, on average, just as smart or smarter, meaning their cognitive ability is average to above average compared to most of their peers. So they're actually just as capable or more capable than the other kids around them. But in their own mind, if you ask them if they believe that, they would usually tell you no. So that's where I go back to combat their misunderstanding about themselves, that they can't do it, by showing them how great they are. Show them where their skills are. Let them know that they have a superpower that just needs to be focused. Like Superman's got that laser vision, where he can melt steel with his eyes, right? They have the same kinds of skills and abilities, but they may not be the same as the kids that are next to them. So help them understand how awesome that they really are. Some suggestions for high schoolers was one question I just saw. I would say the same thing, and probably even more so. The older that kids get, I think the more down on themselves that they can become when we talk about self-confidence and self-esteem. So help kids highlight for them what they're great at. There's something, if you ever have a few minutes before bed, look up. It's a very simple strategy, but if you want to learn more about it, you can look it up. It's called Catch Them Being Good, right? It's a research-based, Catch Them Being Good is a research-based strategy or an intervention that we use in school where we look for anything to compliment a child on. As silly as that sounds, even if you get pushback from older kids, oh, that's corny, mom or dad, why would you say that? Anybody can do that. But the research has shown that it's still helpful to get positive vibes sent to you. So again, when you're in school, that happens more organically. Hey, you answered the question, good job, or here's a good score on your test, or you're making improvements. But at home, we typically don't have a lot of opportunity to compliment each other. But you can find it anywhere. Hey, I really like how when I called you for dinner, you came right to the table this time. Good job. Or, hey, I really like how, when you spilled something on the floor, you cleaned it up right away. So just things that are not hard to do, but that just get a good vibe and a good conversation going about positivity. So keep it positive and keep it supportive. So I think we've answered all the questions that we've had so far. If you guys have any more questions, then please. Oh, one more question just popped in. My gifted ADHD child shows inflexibility with certain things like not doing a task or trying new things because he thinks it is difficult and he cannot do it. How can I help him break through that? So what I've heard from a lot of kids is this, and everyone's different, so this is just one example. But I've met a lot of kids, particularly those with ADHD, who would rather not do something than to do it poorly. And it's interesting because the end result is the same, right? If you're talking about putting effort in school, I had an 8th grader I used to work with. I'll never forget this young man. He was brilliant, by all accounts. I evaluated his IQ, gave him a full psychoeducational assessment. So I did his IQ, I looked at his educational performance. He was absolutely exemplary. He could have taught the class, right? But he was failing, and it was really interesting. And when I asked him why, he said to me, I'll never forget, well, I have a hard time focusing and paying attention, and I feel like I could do it sometimes, and sometimes I feel like I can't do it. But I know if I try my best and I fail, then I've failed at trying to do something. But if I just never try in the first place, I haven't failed at all. I just never signed up for the race. I didn't lose. I just didn't enter. And that's how he looked at it. And I think a lot of kids feel the same way. They don't want to, it's kind of like a relationship. You hear some people, put up walls and they don't want to be vulnerable to being hurt. It can be the same thing when it comes to academics and success. There's a certain level of vulnerability that goes into trying your best and seeing what happens. You enter, let's say, a relay race. You have to risk coming in last if you want to be able to come in first. So a lot of these kids, it's too shattering to them in their minds of, well, if I'm trying my best, that means that I'm not good enough because I've failed. So I'm just not going to enter the race at all. And then it's in my control. It's within my power to say, I have not done this, and it's because I've chosen to not do it. So what I would tell you is to try to empower your child by giving them the gift of safe harbor through failure. What I mean by that is to tell them failure is okay, right? It's through our failures that we become better. It's when we never try that to me is the biggest letdown, is to never have tried at all. There's some kind of a saying coming to mind, it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. And I would try to impart the same notion upon children for academics. It's better to try your best than to have never tried at all. Let's see, we have one or two more questions that have rolled in. Got a couple more minutes, got about 6 minutes. We have to stop at about 2 o'clock, but we have a question. Why can anxiety come out through pickiness at meal times? It's a good question. Eating is an interesting thing for children and for people in general. We can get pretty Freudian on this, which we won't today. But eating is something where you have a lot of self-control. It's your choice what you put in your mouth, what you put in your body when you eat food. So I'm not surprised to see a question about anxiety and food. And I think it depends upon, the genesis of the challenge that this particular person is asking. If it's when they're being forced to eat something, if it's kind of an OCD sort of a thing, if it's I don't want to touch or someone else touched my food, so it may not be clean, particularly around COVID-19. I myself, I'm super picky around, eating and who's touching my food, where it's being prepared, if I'm baking it in the oven to, 160 degrees to bake off any kind of, germs that are on there. But that's generally why I think anxiety can come out around meal times. It's about control, and it's about, for some people, in my opinion, increasing control can reduce anxiety. So when you think about growing up, I remember my mom, if she felt stressed out, beeline right to the sink, doing dishes. Sometimes I wonder if she was just throwing dishes in there just to wash them, right? Because it made her feel in control, and it reduces anxiety, and it feels good to be in control, not because of, a power, in control thing. It's not about a power trip. It's just about, if you're driving a car, would you rather feel in control or out of control? Same concept here, where it's a lot more, you can rest easier when you feel that you're in control of yourself and your situation than when you feel that you're out of control. Someone else asked another question here. How do we deal with a kid with ADHD that has nervous tics or repetitive fidgeting? Some involuntary, how do you correct it or do you let it go? Is there a technique or therapy specifically for it? So that's a good question. It's a challenging question. So nervous tics can come about from a couple different things. Again, I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't want to diagnose or try to diagnose something, but I'll give you a couple of story starters to talk to your physician about. Sometimes we will see things in children with ADHD where there's a nervous tic. I've seen that come on with the onset of medications. I've seen that come on with just age. I've seen it as a part of something, that may be associated, as a secondary disorder. You may have a very, mild case, not saying that this child from the person who asked the question, but just in general, tics can come from something like Tourette's, and there's varying degrees of anything. You can have a strong, presentation of ADHD, a very mild presentation of Tourette's, a strong presentation of Tourette's, mild ADHD. So it could come from a bunch of different things, is my point, right? Same way that anxiety symptoms can come from anxiety or from ADHD or from other things. So how do the person's asking, do you correct it? Do you let it go? I don't have an answer to that because I don't know if there is a straight answer that covers everybody. My general take on things like that are this. I would look to the child's situation. There's something in psychology we call, a global functioning. How does their life function in general? And if this child is doing something like, let's say they have a repetitive behavior or an involuntary tic or a tic, for those of you who aren't familiar, could be something like a verbalization or cough, things like that, where they're not actually coughing, but because they're sick, it's just kind of something that they're making their body do involuntarily. So my take is you want to avoid making something out to be bad, right? Because then you get a lot of guilt with that and a lot of self-consciousness that comes with, oh my gosh, I'm already self-conscious about doing this, and now this person's telling me how bad it is and I should stop doing it. So what I would do is I would have a gentle conversation with the child to find out, from them, from their teacher separately, how impactful is this behavior? If it's something where the child says, I want to learn how to stop doing X, Y, or Z because it makes me really self-conscious, then I would try to put something in place. And you can start to do things like an ABC assessment or an antecedent to behavior and a consequence assessment, where you can look to see, does this child start to get these behaviors right before they have to go and speak to the class to answer a question, like my example of when I'm sitting there and I have to, read a paragraph out to the other kids, which made me so nervous. Or they have to do a math problem, or they have to go do a one-on-one project, or they know that the teacher does, we're gonna get it in groups. Do you remember this, to all the parents here? Do you remember group work and the anxiety that comes with, okay, we're gonna get into groups, everybody find a group with 3 to 5 people, and you start to go, am I cool enough to work with her or him? Will I get picked for a group? So find out, what the genesis of this problem or this tic comes from. Figure that out, and you can start to say, before you do this, again, do some deep breathing, calm yourself down, be more aware of what your body's doing. So I would say it's a case by case. If it's a child where that talking about it and trying to stop it is going to make them feel more self-conscious, more nervous, and that'll actually worsen the tic or the repetitive behavior, you need to keep that in mind. So it's totally case by case per child. But there are different things that you can do. There are different techniques and therapies. We can't unpack all of them right now because there's so many different, etiologies of that challenge, right? But in terms of repetitive fidgeting, that's something that's really interesting. There's some great research. If you want to get a good read, there's a professor who is up at, I believe he's at Harvard, John Ratey, R-A-T-E-Y, and his focus area is fidgeting in ADHD. And actually, I want to try to get in touch with him myself because we're very interested in that too from a data and scientific perspective. We're seeing in our device and our metrics when we look at, general just aggregated, nameless numbers, and we look at our data that we have on our kiddos, and we say, wow, we see trends here that we can share back with our users. We do that individually where we'll say, did you know that for your particular child, when they fidget more during math, we've seen a 20% improvement in their focus level. So that means fidgeting is good and helpful, at least in math. Or did you know that when your child took 3,000 steps last week, that their focus was 15% improved across the board last week or last month? So repetitive fidgeting can certainly come on and be increased with things like anxiety, but it can also be a tool that the child is using to help themselves focus, to increase their focus. It goes along with white noise or playing classical music when your child is trying to focus. Again, in my experience, an ADHD brain is hungry for information. I read a study not too long ago that said as adults with ADHD check their email way more than adults without ADHD because we're hungry for new incoming fresh data. It's like the movie Short Circuit with Johnny Five, the robot from the 80s. He wants more data. That's kind of how the brains of kids and adults with ADHD are. So I would tell you that, again, the cause of the fidgeting, depending on where it comes from, could be very different. So it's a case by case for each child. Cool. What are some good venues to encourage that failure is okay? Well, you can share a story about this guy with ADHD who started a company called Revibe. Here's a personal story that you can share. When we first created a business, I was a psychologist, not a businessman. So I came through what's called an accelerator program for spinning new businesses up and helping them to be successful. And they told us something really interesting. They said, we're here because we want to help you fail quickly and fail early if you're going to fail. And I was perplexed by this notion of failure is good. They said, we want you to fail quickly. And I said, why? They said, because then you'll know that whatever you were just trying to do didn't work, and we're not going to waste any time on that aspect of what you were doing or even that business. So in terms of giving a good venue for your child to fail, something that I think is powerful, a powerful message that's super simple, but I think it's overlooked, is to truly, and this is hard, to put your money where your mouth is as a mom or a dad or a grandparent or a caretaker, but to be able to look your child right in the eye and tell them, I really don't care what your grades are. I care that you can look at me and tell me that you tried your absolute best. And if your best is a C or a D, I'm going to celebrate you, and I'm going to support you, and I'm going to cherish that grade you got. Because kids have got this status quo of you have to have a B, B plus, that's pretty good. A C, that's pretty bad. And most of us have the same thing as adults, right? That's how we were brought up in a school system, to understand that an A is the best and that's what you should strive for. A B is okay. A C, you'll keep going through life with a C, but we really want you to do better. A D is like not good, we'll pass you, but we're frowning. And an F means that you're a failure. So to get away from all that and to just say, I'm not concerned about what the number or letter on the paper is. I'm concerned that you can look at me and you can say that I tried my absolute best. I'll never get mad at you because you didn't get an A or a B or a C or a D. I'll only be upset with you if you didn't care, if you just went into it and said, I don't care about any of this, because school is important and you trying your best is important. That's a verbal venue that I would recommend that you give that child that key, you give them that power to fail. All right, we're blinking here. I see things blinking, but I don't see any more questions. So let's see if there's any more. Oh, here we go. There's a couple of chats going on here. What do we have? We're 6 minutes over time here. Our crowd has stayed with us, and we appreciate that, all of our active participants. So let me zip through a couple of these. Yes, the comment about the grades. Thank you very much for saying that. Good, we never explained to the teachers, we never upset. Exactly. So we have a supportive parent who supports what I just said, and I really appreciate that. But she's saying that her son, it sounds like, or her child, doesn't necessarily pick up on the vibes that the family is giving. So doesn't seem to receive the message, more ways to praise. It's tough. What I will say is the same way that we train, our athletes and our physicians, surgeons and stuff through muscle memory, do the same thing over and over. I have seen where kids a lot of times just need to hear that message in an unwavering fashion. It could take weeks, it could take months, or it could take years for them to finally sink in. You are awesome, and I don't care about your grade. For some kids, though, and this goes back to the anxiety, some kids are naturally conscientious, to a point that's almost a negative sometimes. They're so self-driven, they're so conscientious about their success that they won't let themselves fail. And again, that's something that you have to work with that child on. And there's, in some cases, and this is a tough pill to swallow as a mom or a dad or a grandparent, there's some cases that, you can never give up. We put that first, never give up. But there are some cases where you can't fix or perfect everything that is challenging for your child. You can't smooth every single bump out sometimes. And that's doesn't sit well with any parents naturally, but there's some point where you have to just say, from a parent guilt side of things particularly, I'm doing everything I can, and I've given this child every opportunity that I've given them. And if they're still going to be hard on themselves, they may just always be harder on themselves than they should, but at least if they were 90% hard on themselves, now they're only, 20% hard on themselves. So we've made good improvements. And you as a parent have to celebrate your improvements and your victories as a mom or dad, because it's real easy to get down on yourself and to fault yourself for not doing every single thing for your child and making sure that they're completely perfect and everything's completely how you want it. So you can't let that happen, okay? You've got to celebrate your victories along with them as well. That's really important. But the key is progress. As long as they're making some gains and some growth, even if it's not fixed, make sure that they're getting better and better. That's what I think this is all about. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. We love all you guys. We'll keep doing these things. Please let us know if you have any requests for certain topics. We'd love to meet your needs as parents. You guys need people who support you, and we're happy to be a part of your support system. And of course, use your physicians, your pediatricians, psychologists, psychiatrists, school psychologists, etc. Again, I'm Rich Brancaccio. Stay well. Keep fighting the good fight. You guys can be successful. Your kids can do it. I promise you. Just never give up. Thank you, guys. Take care.